Hello, and welcome to the Calmcast, a time to feel calm and think clearly. I'm Claire Downham, the Queen of Calm, a transformational life coach. I was a burnt-out head teacher who finally made the journey to calm after years of trying, and I want to prevent you from having to do the same. The Calmcast is a series of short explorations, gently guiding you back to your natural state, which is calm and clarity. Just listen like you would listen to music, with an open mind and curiosity. There's nothing else to do. Now let's relax into today's episode. So today we're exploring criticism, and I have to laugh because I would say that I was I still am quite a critical person. I notice it more and I bring it into check a little more these days, but it is still a presence. I'm not going to say it's a part of who I am because I see now that that's not who I really am, that is a transient thing that happens within me. It's thought. That's not who any of us are. However, it is an aspect of my behavior that I would like to have a little less of. And just the caveat to that is that it is phenomenally less than it used to be. It used to be an awful lot more than it is now, but it's still there. It's still something that comes up a lot. And it was interesting actually, because I was doing, I've done a live already on Insight Timer about this. And what came up really was a lot of us of my generation. So, a lot of the people who turn up to my lives on Insight Timer are women in midlife, women born in the 70s and 80s, maybe the 60s too. I was born in 71, so I was right, just on the cusp of the 70s. And that we were brought up in a critical environment. And I've said this so many times before, that the parenting style was, if we tell our children, that they're not quite good enough, that they're not quite doing enough, that they're not quite, that they could be better, if we tell them enough that they'll step up and they'll be better, and therefore they'll have a nicer experience of life. And I totally and utterly believe that all of our parents did that with our best interests at heart. But I now call it, quite lightheartedly, treat 'em mean, keep 'em keen parenting, because that's what it was like. It was, it was being told that you're not quite good enough, a lot, really. And I also am aware of, or I became aware as I got older, of my mum's self-criticism as well, because I think as women, it's often our mums that we look to for our role model of life. And I do remember when I was poorly, when I burnt out, I spent a lot of extra time with my parents, because they looked after me a lot. And I became aware of my mum's self-berating. Her saying, "You're a stupid woman," and, every time she made a mistake, so she used to do a lot of Sudokus and crosswords and stuff, and she'd have a little Tipp-Ex pen out, she'd make a mistake, "Oh, stupid woman, what an idiot," that kind. And I remember once saying to her, "Well, that's, you're not an idiot because you're not stupid because you." "Oh, yes, I am, and it's good to know that you're stupid." I was just like, wow. And even then, even before I came across the understanding that I share with you on these sessions, even then I thought, wow, it's not it's not a good way to speak to yourself, is it? Now it's not saying there's anything wrong with my mum, or it's just that's her thinking. And to be fair, the way she carried it, my mum has hardly been a woman who's been squashed down by her thinking. She, for her has worked. If you know what I mean. She's done well in life, and she's, a very active, very, full of life 79-year-old woman who has gone through a lot, especially in the last few years. So she's a tough cookie. But for many of us, that voice, the critical voice inside, is just a bit too much, isn't it? And it's there a lot. Now, for me, that kind of it's really interesting for me, because I know that for a lot of people, the inner critic remains very noisy for a very long time. But for me, it that seems to have silenced. It seems to have reduced a lot. However, my external critic, the one who tells other people, particularly Bruce, bless him, that they're not okay, or they're not doing okay, they're not doing it right, or they could do it better. That is the bit for me that is still, yeah, still lurking around, I suppose. It's still part of my way of being in the world at the moment. Now, I would say it's less. Like, I am really noticing the thoughts arising, and realizing that, because they're bringing with them this discomfort, this horrible feeling that they're not to be said out loud. And that's helpful, because I can now observe some critical thoughts that go in and out. And I think, like I often say, it's like an ever decreasing circle thing. So I kind of notice, I watch a dog owner not pick up the dog poo, or I see somebody, oh, there was a man the other day I mean, we just learn how to not think well of ourselves. We watched a man the other day, and as we came round the corner, he was screeching at his son. Absolutely, this is what naughtiness does. It was awful. And like, awful to observe. I realised that that poor man was suffering at the time when he was delivering that, but he was shouting at us. I think what had happened, we didn't see what happened, but we think the little boy had messed about on his bike, and he'd crashed into the dad's bike and damaged the dad's bike in some way. And this man was actually, throwing his bike on the floor and like a toddler, like throwing his bike on the floor and then screaming at the little boy. And we kind of awkwardly snuck past. But there's a few things about that. First of all, there was my initial reaction to that, my initial critical reaction. Nobody should speak to a child like that. What is wrong with, look at him? He looks like a toddler. What's he teaching his child? He's going to expect his child to behave well, and he's demonstrating really poor behavior. I was and then I was kind of, then I was like reflecting and thinking, wow, if I was in that man's state of mind, if I had his thinking, I would do exactly the same. And I don't know what that little boy is like on a day-to-day basis. I don't know that man's situation. I don't know how little sleep he's had. Everybody really is doing the best they can with the thinking that looks true to them in the moment, and including him. And it's really easy to judge, isn't it? Now, when I think about criticism in relationships, because this is kind of the focus for at the moment, is around relationships. I see that for me, it's getting less, but I think it's like everything else that's a bit off about, it's behavior we want to change, or it's things that we kind of don't want to react to anymore. We don't want to react that way anymore. Is that there's there's a horrible feeling that comes with it. When I start to feel critical, or I start to want to deliver a critical message, shall we say, there is definitely some yuckiness, as somebody on my live yesterday on Inside Timer, she said yucky was the description of the feeling that comes with with any kind of off thought, any thought that is not putting the truth of who you are out into the world. And the truth of who you are is love, peace, wisdom, not criticism. Criticism is thought. And I think when we see that, there's quite a lot of space. And it's space that we need, you know? It's a pause that we need. It's a moment that we need. And there's a lot of freedom available when we see that in the moment, when we experience this discomfort. And I'm not saying it's fun to experience discomfort, but that's a lovely warning to let us know that we're going into criticism. Now, it's probably good at this point to mention the root cause of, why do we criticize? Well, one thing that comes to mind is we think other people think the same way as us and should know better. Like, I see people do something, like somebody doesn't pick up litter or drops litter or doesn't pick up dog dirt or whatever else happens in the world that I don't like. And I for a moment, or sometimes still full on, I think, well, they should know better. This person, why doesn't this person know not to do that? It's wrong to let your dog poo and then not pick it up. We have this joke now, when we're walking, because we walk a lot, and when you're walking a lot, you do see how much dog poo there is. And we just go, we warn each other, we go, dog toilet, as we're walking past. It's like our little comedy thing about dogs going to the toilet in our public spaces. But it's not particularly funny if you get it on your shoe, is it? So I go into this, well, I know if I had a dog, that one, if I was in that situation, I would do this. But that's absolute rubbish, because you're not somebody else. You don't have their thinking. They don't have your thinking. People don't know that there's your right way of doing things, and they may have some awareness that it's a thing to do to pick up dog poo, but maybe they just don't want to today, or they've hurt their back, or I don't know their story. I don't need to know their story. But the criticism comes from the idea that there's a right way to do life, and there are 8 billion unique ways to do life, because there are 8 billion humans on the planet with 8 billion separate realities. I mean, we can kind of discount those babies before about 2 years old, because they don't really have a separation at all, so they don't see it that way. But that soon changes, and every adult on this planet is living life the best they can with the thinking that looks true to them. And of course, criticism is rooted in that. And I think the closer people are to us, and this is when I talk about the ever-decreasing circles, like for me, with Bruce, it's definitely, well, I've told him I don't want him to do that. I've told him this is the way I'd like this thing done. Why doesn't he know that? Well, because in the moment, his head doesn't provide him with that thought. It doesn't work that way. Just because you've told somebody something, just because you've shown them, just because you've said, I want this job doing this way, doesn't mean that person's capacity to hear that is always there. So, and it doesn't empower people. It takes people away from their own inner guidance, because it looks then like they're doing life wrong, and your way of doing life is right, so they should be doing it differently. But of course, it's not really doesn't really work that way. So I think it's empowerment for us too. It's empowerment for us. Every time I notice one of those critical thoughts popping up, and I let it go, without speaking it, I feel more empowered. And I think as a result of that, the other person feels more empowered, because they can trust themselves. They can, they don't feel, pecked down all the time by me. And I'm talking about Bruce in the main, because he's the main victim of me when I'm being critical. So yeah, it's it's a nicer way to live life, isn't it? So, yeah, I hope you find that helpful. And I hope I am recording this by the sea, but on a road. So there's a little bit of background vehicle noise. I hope that's not been too distracting. So take care. Lots of love, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much for listening. There's nothing to do now but bring some awareness to how this is working out in your life. Listen regularly to experience longer and longer periods of calm. This has been the Calmcast with Claire Downham, Queen of Calm. Take care and keep listening.